This video is sponsored and brought to you by the dreamers that hang out on my live streams. Stay tuned to the end of the video to hear their names. If you want a chance to vote on what videos I release next, check out the Mr. X Dreams Discord server. Imagine you're standing in a sweltering jungle. The hour is early, before dawn. From the blackness of the jungle, you hear a familiar voice calling out to you. What do you do? Listen to this story about a mysterious entity that lurks in the darkness, waiting for just the right person to wander along. This story is based on a post from Reddit, r/paranormal, from user Eternity Pleasure, entitled, Don't Follow Her Voice. I'll leave a link in the description to the original post because I completely pretty much rewrote it for the purposes of this story. Hello all. This story is not necessarily my own personal account, but rather something I was told by my father. He and my uncle had this experience when they were kids. It's a bit on the lengthy side, so I'll get right into it. My father and his elder brother, my uncle, were best friends growing up in India during the late 60s. Dad used to live in a very small village called Maharashtra. The village is actually located in the jungle and had a population of under 800 people at the time. It was mostly farmers. There was little to no electricity available. They didn't even have clocks. Folks had to tell time based on the position of the sun. I know it sounds like medieval times, but that was the situation for most tribal people in India. My father, then 8 or 10 years old, and my uncle, then 15 or 16, used to get up early in the morning before sunrise and go out into the jungle to cut wood. The wood they cut would be used for daily needs like cooking, etc. My aunt, their elder sister, would make breakfast for them. They would eat bakri, a kind of Indian bread, and sabji, a type of curry. She would either pack a meal for them so they could eat later, or deliver the food to them while they worked in the jungle. The area where they chopped their wood was very familiar to them, so they never had a hard time finding each other out there, even in the early light. My grandfather, their father obviously, would always be out getting the farming work started. They would have their breakfast together and then come back with the logs from the jungle. One day, during the winter, my uncle and father got up early in the morning as usual. It was still dark because the sun rises a bit later in the winter season. My aunt was still sleeping, so they decided not to disturb her. They picked up their axes and went into the jungle. That day, for some reason, they decided to go a bit further than usual, deeper into the jungle. They went so far that before they realized it, they were unable to see the lantern lights of the village. Not wanting to waste the trip, they decided to get at least one tree down and gather what they could. After a while, my uncle noticed something suspicious. He wondered why the sun had not risen yet, even though they had been in the jungle for a couple of hours. Just by instinct, he knew that by that time, there should have been birds singing and roosters crowing, all the typical signs of the morning. However, there was no noise, no cattle mooing, no dogs barking alongside their shepherds. All there was in the air was an eerie, profound silence. The two decided to hurry up with their work and try to get out of there sooner rather than later. Now, before going on any further, let me be very clear about my uncle. He's a very tough guy. Nothing scares the dude easily. He's well respected by the whole village, to this day. Same goes for my father. But in that moment, something was different. He didn't know why, but he was feeling like there was something very wrong. Perhaps like something was watching them from deep inside the jungle. My uncle somehow knew it was not a tiger, a cheetah, jaguar, or a wild boar. I guess he had felt the presence of those things before, and this was not it. All of a sudden, my father and uncle both heard the voice of my aunt. She sounded distant, like she was searching for them from afar. They couldn't see her, they just heard her voice, clear as day. My uncle was immediately suspicious because the voice was coming from deep in the jungle, not from the direction of the village. He told my father to tell her to come to them. When he did so, the call stopped for a moment, and then she replied, "No, you come to me. Hurry. I've brought you your favorite food. At that moment, my uncle realized what they were dealing with. He had heard stories from the other villagers about a voice which leads people away into the depths of the jungle, sometimes never to be found again. In cases where the lost people did return to the village, they were often afflicted by an extremely disturbed and even destroyed mental state. The voice was said to belong to a paranormal entity called a Chakva, a supernatural being who has the ability to hypnotically lull you into a vulnerable mental state, even so far as to make you harm your own body. As my uncle thought about this, putting it all together in his head, he suddenly realized something else. Being a naive 8-year-old boy, my dad had begun walking toward the sound of his sister's voice. He started to call out to her, replying. The voice began calling his name, yelling, "Come, this way. I'm waiting here with your breakfast." My uncle ran towards my father at full speed and grabbed him by his shirt collar. He said, "Don't listen to her. Come on, we must go home." My father replied, "But it's our sister. She's calling us and I'm hungry." By that time, my uncle had already grabbed my father's hand and told him, "She's bluffing with us. She has no food. Now come on." My father was about to start arguing with my uncle, but then he noticed his older brother's hand was shaking. He looked into my uncle's eyes, and for the first time in his life, he saw true fear in them. They walked the rest of the way back to the village as fast as they could, without another word. As they got closer to the village, they heard the mysterious voice again. "Why are you going that way? Come here, follow my voice," she said. My uncle, still holding my father's hand, said, "Ignore her." Needless to say, he was trying to divert my father's attention and play it cool so he wouldn't panic. Their long walk back to the village felt like an eternity. Now, being a Hindu by religion, my uncle started mumbling mantras of Lord Rama. The voice slowly started to fade away as they got closer to the village. My uncle took a long sigh of relief when he finally heard the sound of dogs barking from the direction of the village. He saw the light from the lanterns and knew that they were getting close. He said it looked like all the dogs in the village had gathered together and started making loud crying noises like wolves. Concerned that the entity might have still been following them, the two ran the rest of the way to the village. They stopped by our ancestral temple, joined hands and bowed their heads, saying thank you. Once they reached home, my uncle and father saw that my aunt was still in her bed. I suppose my father was still confused about what had happened, because he badmouthed her for beating them in a race back to the house. They later found out that they got mixed up and left the house way too early, as in around 2 a.m. or maybe even earlier. To make things worse, it happened to also be a moonless night. And that's it. My dad and uncle talk about this story often, so I figure I would pass it on. Thanks for listening. Alright my friends, greetings, Mr. X Dreams here. So, I believe this was the first story I ever got from India. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's pretty awesome. And I did get it from Reddit. So when I was reading this story on Reddit, I noticed a similar one in the comments. Long story short, there was another person whose father once heard a sister calling out to him from the jungle, saying she wanted him to come help her pick fruits. And he went in and started picking the fruits with her, only to find that his sister was nowhere to be found. And what's even stranger is that every time he went to put fruit into the basket that he brought with him, the basket would be empty. Like something was taking all the fruit that he picked when he wasn't looking. Really, a really eerie feeling that must have been for him, especially being alone out there in the wilderness. There was also another person who grew up in Maharashtra and who was familiar with the legend of this cryptid. And this individual mentioned the story of a whole family of people who spent an unknown amount of lost time in the jungle, and all the while hearing numerous voices of loved ones, and basically that time seemed to freeze around them, and they had no idea how long they were in there. There were also multiple commenters that mentioned Chakva entities luring people into water and drowning them. So that's another one of the reasons why I would say it's worth the read to go back and listen and look at at least the comments section of the original Reddit post. Hopefully I'll remember to post it, put it in the comments section down below, so y'all can check that out easily. So I tried doing some research into the Chakva on my own, but I couldn't really seem to find anything about it in English. However, I figure if multiple Indian people happen to write about the same phenomenon on the same Reddit thread, it can't be a complete fabrication out of whole cloth, I would assume. So I wonder where lies the grain of truth within the legend. It was a pretty wild thread. Definitely check it out. If you are in India, or you're from India, and you've heard about this Chakva entity, please do let me know in the comments down below. So now I want to know what you think. Could this have been a case of basically group hallucination, both of the boys hearing the sister's voice for normal psychological human reasons? Or do you believe that there really could be deceptive entities wandering the jungles of India? I also wonder if the dogs of the village sensed something strange and were perhaps trying to help with their howling somehow. I got a really funny feeling when reading that part of the story. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. So now I'm going to open up the floor for the dreamers listening live to weigh in. Remember, if you want a chance at your question or comment showing up in a future video, or the chance to sponsor a video, turn on notifications so you catch the live show with the live reading and discussion. Great times. So, Cindy S. says, it would most likely be a demon to mimic the voice of a family member perfectly, but also knowing what the family member's voice sounded like. It would have had to read their minds. Yeah, it's an interesting idea because not only, you're right, not only did this entity have to know the exact vocal patterns of the sister, but also what the sister is known to do during that time. And interestingly enough, not even what the sister does during that time, because that wasn't the right time. What they expected the sister to do, what they would have thought was normal based on their misinterpretation of what time it was. Very interesting idea there. Brett Learmonth says, there's an Inuit entity, I forget the name at the moment, but it tickles you to death with micro sharp nails that are not visible. So you get tickled, but at the same time you're getting microscopically sliced up. That sounds absolutely horrifying. That sounds horrible, terrible. I don't like that, and but I do want to look into that. That said, because if there's anything I enjoy talking about is things that are extremely disturbing like that. So Brett, if you can, here's a homework assignment. If you can look that up and see if you could find it and email it to me, I will definitely look into that and see if I can speak on it in the future. Thank you in advance. Terico says, I feel like it's rare in paranormal stories for a person to ask a suspicious entity to come towards them. However, its refusal to reveal itself obviously warrants caution. Yeah, it's definitely strange, and I think that the key point in this case is the fact that it was a child thinking that his sister was calling him. So they kind of did that as a test to see, all right, if that's our sister somehow and she's somehow deeper in the jungle than we are, then she should have no problem coming to us. After all, she's bringing us our breakfast. So it was a test, and the creature, the entity, failed that test. Lorie Long said the voice mimic idea comes up a lot in Dogman and Wendigo stories as well. Definitely, and I think it's very strange that that is the case, because you wouldn't think a Dogman would be able to do or even think, or let alone a Wendigo, which is, I believe, probably even crazier than a Dogman would be. You wouldn't think those types of beings would be able to comprehend such things, but I have heard a lot of stories where a person happens to hear similar voices to, voices they recognize as other members of their family. Samantha says, was this a crocata? Crocota, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. She says, not sure if I spelled that right, but it mimics. It is some sort of a cryptid known out of India. I'm not sure. I have to look that up. Another thing for me to look up, and I'll have to do that. Let me take a second and copy that over. All right. Dark Phoenix says, I wonder why these entities use your loved one's voice. They're very smart because some people will fall for it and follow the voices and could potentially end up falling victim. I agree. It's a very sinister tactic, a very unnerving thing to know that you might not be able to trust the voice of your own loved one. Ambar Chavez says, a group hallucination is a possibility, but if I was a stranded ghost with endless time on my hands, it would be only a matter of time before I became mischievous and started messing with people. Yeah, I could see that. That's a very compelling case. Even if it's just a normal, standard run-of-the-mill ghost, yeah, they could be pretty bored. Maybe it's somebody who died out there in the jungle and just decided, you know what? I'm going to start messing with people. I've been here for 50 years. I don't have anything better to do. Why not? So, let's get a code word here. As always, I totally forgot to ask for one ahead of time, but I can rely on the dreamers listening in the live chat to hook me up. So let's see what they come up with. So, Dreamer Lady Draco 87 came up with the code word curry, and I have to agree. That curry must be really good if the boys are willing to trek deep into the jungle to get it. So, if you're still listening to this part of the video, you're exactly the dreamer I want to hear from. Type the word curry in a comment down below. Be creative. Surprise me so I can see you. Take care, my friends. Later. Special thanks to this week's Super Chat sponsors: Cindy, Terico, Lilah, Lorie, Zen, Samantha, Jessica B., and The Night Companion. Thank you all very much. All right. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and share. If you made it to the very end, you're exactly the kind of subscriber I'm looking for. Don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way, you can catch the live show and discuss the stories with me. Your input might even appear in my next video. Last thing, if you heard a code word after the story, type it in a comment down below so I know who the real dreamers are. Take care, my friend. Until next time.